Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Bahrain sentences one protester to death, jails medics for treating demonstrators. Syrian defectors fight back against Assad's forces as the U.S. is accused of inciting violence. And rival Yemeni forces clash across Sanaa. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
أصدرت محكمة استثنائية عسكرية في البحرين حكما بالإعدام على
A special military court in Bahrain sentenced a man to death after convicting him of killing a policeman during the wave of protests witnessed in the country earlier this year. His partner in the case was sentenced to life in prison. The same court handed down sentences to doctors and nurses who treated the injured during the protests. 13 medics were sentenced to 15 years. Amnesty International condemned the sentences, considering them to be evidence of travesty of justice in Bahrain.
The military prosecutor general said the primary special court unanimously agreed to execute Ali Youssef Abdul Wahab al-Tawil and sentenced another man in the same case to life in prison. The two activists were convicted of intentionally killing a policeman for carrying out his duties in Manama. The court said the killing was premeditated with the convicted using their own vehicle. The two activists were also convicted of participating in a gathering in a public place with the aim of disrupting security and public order. Critics said the sentences were handed down by a military court while it should have been a civilian court. They added that a royal decree was issued on the matter but was not implemented.
These doctors and citizens are being prosecuted by the Court of National Safety, which is a military court. Political societies rejected it, seeing that Bahrain's constitution does not allow the prosecution of civilians in military courts. Decree number 62 was issued by the king and refers all cases from the National Safety Court to regular courts, but this decree was not executed.
The court also sentenced 20 medics, including women, to prison. Their sentences ranged between 5 and 15 years. The convicted were working at al-Sulaymaniyah Medical Center, which formed an essential hub for the protest movement that was led by the Shiites and demanded change in the kingdom. The accused were convicted of forcefully occupying al-Sulaymaniyah Medical Center by controlling its entrances and exits, and all its departments and essential administrations. According to the indictment, they used force and threats and possessed Kalashnikovs and white weapons without permits. In addition, the convicted were accused of promoting the violent overthrow and change of the ruling regime, seizing medical equipment and missing work without excuse to the detriment of patients and the injured.
Al-Sulaymaniyah Hospital's chief executive was brought by the military prosecutor to testify. So he presented his testimony in court and denied that the accused occupied Al-Sulaymaniyah Hospital. Madam, Al-Sulaymaniyah Hospital is the main hospital and the only one in Bahrain. The hospital holds 950 beds, and it is the hospital that serves all popular segments in Bahrain. And this hospital is important for Bahrain, and the only thing those doctors did is treating the injured, who had nowhere else to go to get treatment during the events.
The authorities say 4 policemen died after being run over by vehicles during the demonstrations. The protest movement was controlled by the authorities in mid-March, 1 month after they started, and led to imposing emergency law and calling for the intervention of Saudi forces in an operation dubbed Gulf Shield. In addition, an arrest campaign targeted opposition activists. According to the authorities, the events led to the death of 24 people, and 4 activists died in detention. Hayan Yaqub, BBC.
Syrian activists confirmed that 47 people have been killed over the past 3 days by the security forces' gunfire in various cities. Most victims were killed in the city of al-Rastan in Homs province, which witnessed a series of airstrikes by the Syrian Air Force. In a statement, the Al-Harmoush Brigade, which is affiliated with the Syrian Free Army, announced the launch of military operations against members of the security forces and Shabiha in Jabal al-Zawiya. In a notable development, the regime's supporters pelted the U.S. ambassador with stones and tomatoes as he left the office of an opposition leader in Damascus. Following the attack, Syrian authorities accused the U.S. of inciting violence against their security forces.
As the
protests continue against President Bashar al-Assad's regime, the Syrian army intensified its security operations across various regions of Homs province, especially in al-Rastan, where clashes are raging with army defectors. The Syrian Revolution General Commission said 2 explosions rocked the Bayada neighborhood amid heavy gunfire. The commission added that massive explosions were reported on Al-Zair Street, also amid heavy gunfire. Other explosions were also reported near al-Abbasiyya checkpoint, Deir Balba, and Bab Amr neighborhood.
وقالت الهيئة إن قوات الجيش وما يعرف بالشبيحة
The commission said that security forces and the Shabiha fired heavily from the Bab Tadmor checkpoint toward Bab Sibah and Morasia streets, inflicting casualties among residents. The Syrian Revolution Coordination Union said the Syrian army deployed military planes to shell the city of al-Rastan, which has been under attack for days. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that Wednesday's death toll included 14 victims in Homs, 2 in Daraa, and 1 in Banias. In another development, the Syrian Revolution Coordination Union said that army defectors ambushed a group of Shabiha en route to Jabal Zawiya in Idlib province, killing dozens.
In response to the heinous attacks on the city of al-Rastan and the crackdowns in Jabal al-Zawiya, the Al-Harmoush Brigade targeted a Shabiha bus at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, September 28, 2011. The Jabal al-Zawiya bus was en route from al-Masuma base near the Jericho Bridge.
In addition, a number of student protests were staged across various Syrian regions, demanding the downfall of the regime and the execution of President Bashar al-Assad.
According
to a Syrian news website, the U.S. ambassador to Damascus, Robert Ford, was pelted with tomatoes this morning by dozens of President Assad's supporters in the capital. Syrian Akhbar News Online said that a group of youths attacked U.S. Ambassador Ford while en route to the office of the chair of the National Coordination Committee, attorney Hassan Abdel-Azim, in protest of his country's position on the events in Syria. Following the attack, a Syrian official source accused the U.S. of blatantly inciting the use of violence against the Syrian army by armed groups. According to the official Syria Sanaa news agency, the Syrian Foreign Ministry slammed comments by U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesman Mark Toner, who described the, quote, terrorist acts in Syria as natural. The source added that such irresponsible remarks will encourage acts of terrorism and chaos in order to serve foreign agendas against the interests of the Syrian people. It added that Syria strongly condemns the U.S. statements and affirms its determination to preserve its security and stability, to defend its citizens, and to oppose all attempts to interfere in its internal affairs. Despite the use of violence to quell the protests, Syrians staged nighttime rallies across various regions. In the Damascus neighborhood of Hamouria, a protest was held in solidarity with al-Rastan and to demand the downfall of the regime. In Idlib, massive protests were held after evening prayers in support of al-Rastan and to demand international protection for civilians. A nighttime rally was also held in Homs, calling for the unity of the opposition and for the execution of President Assad and his pillars.
إلى اليمن حيث أفاد مراسل الجزيرة أن الشخصين من أنصار صادق الأحمر.
Our Al Jazeera correspondent reported that 2 supporters of Hashid tribe leader Sadiq al-Ahmar were killed and 5 others were wounded in artillery shelling launched by President Ali Abdullah Saleh's loyalist forces. The shelling targeted the house of Himyar al-Ahmar, the deputy speaker of parliament in the Sufan neighborhood of the Hassaba area north of Sanaa.
Marches continued in a number of cities demanding the downfall of the president. In the capital Sanaa, a massive demonstration took place vowing to try President Saleh. Participants expressed their rejection to a political settlement.
Saleh ordered a ceasefire a few days ago, and gunfire intensified in the streets of Sanaa. At dawn, the northern area of the capital witnessed violent clashes between the Republican Guards, led by the president's son, and armed supporters of the revolution. The government forces' shelling targeted sites belonging to tribal leader Sadiq al-Ahmar and Major General Ali Mohsen al-Ahmar. This has led to increased fear that the president's return from Saudi Arabia does not aim to contain the country's crisis, but rather fuel it, according to the opposition. The opposition added that Saleh, who was beautified overseas, returned to reveal his real face to administer the crisis. However, there is no imminent solution nor means to defuse the conflict, as many had hoped. His return only brought an expected escalation and new maneuvers aimed at prolonging the crisis instead of resolving it.
Ahmed Ali and Ali Saleh are the enemies of the youth, the enemies of the people.
These people were martyred as the death toll has been on the rise shortly before and after Saleh's return. Within 1 week, more than 100 Yemenis died. And with his return, the killing was resumed and the Gulf Initiative became dependent on what the opposition describes as the political maneuvers led by the president to completely eliminate the initiative and perhaps push the country into a civil war, which the vice president has previously warned of. Saleh withdrew from signing the initiative 3 times. Each time, his excuses negated his obligations toward the regional sponsors of the initiative and their supporters in the West. Political observers and analysts were hopeful that Saleh would finally be committed to the initiative, especially after he survived an assassination attempt in June. But according to his opponents, death, which Saleh saw before his own eyes, made him more prone to seek revenge and more afraid of legal prosecution if the Gulf Initiative is implemented and the transition of power is completed against his will. If the situation continues, it may lead to a ploy to change the principles of the Yemeni conflict that will threaten the peacefulness of the anti-Saleh protests. The demonstrators, who have been flowing to the streets of the capital and other cities for nearly 9 months, may be forced to resort to other methods in order to change the regime, which some people assert is Saleh's goal. They say Saleh is attempting to prolong the crisis or even turn it into a civil war, so as part of the crisis or because of it, Saleh would stay in power, seeing that this is his only goal, according to his opponents.
In Yemen's Ib province, hundreds of children took part in a demonstration in solidarity with a child named Anas Saidi, who was killed in the shelling of Sanaa by President Ali Abdullah Saleh's forces on September 19th. The children demanded the prosecution of the perpetrators who killed Saidi.
قتل ما لا يقل عن 12 مقاتلا من الثوار الليبيين.
At least 12 Libyan revolutionary fighters were killed and dozens were wounded in violent battles inside the besieged city of Sirte, which was shelled by NATO in the last several hours. Meanwhile, the revolutionaries continue their attacks on 3 fronts in order to take control of the city.
The revolutionaries are leading a decisive battle with heavy weaponry in the regions that are still out of their control. The road they chose to liberate all of Libya passes through this coastal city, Gaddafi's birthplace. These fighters are aware that their mission is dangerous in the face of the Libyan colonels' battalions. It seems that the revolutionary sacrifices for liberating Sirte provided an incentive to quickly advance on the Western Front. Their missiles, rockets, and heavy artillery fire forced Gaddafi's battalions to retreat inside the city. Dozens of armored trucks pushed into Sirte and advanced to a location only 5 kilometers from the city center. Fighters also managed to fully control the northern areas of the city, connecting the Western Front with the Eastern Front.
God willing, the coastal areas have been secured by the revolutionaries of the Western Front and the revolutionaries of the Eastern Front near Abu Hadi Island.
Military commanders indicated that the fighting would be temporarily stopped out of humanitarian consideration, which has been a common practice in the last several days as civilians continue to flee Sirte. The current situation may leave Gaddafi's loyalists only one choice: to turn themselves in to the revolutionaries.
The fighting was temporarily stopped to give residents a chance to escape Sirte.
The military spokesman also confirmed the revolutionaries' control over Sirte's port, airport, and several military bases. He stressed that the revolutionaries' top priority is to liberate all of Libya and guarantee the security of the liberated cities. He indicated that capturing Gaddafi is not their main goal right now, in light of unconfirmed information about Gaddafi hiding near Khadameh city, close to the Algerian border. Other information asserts that Gaddafi's son al-Mu'tasim Billah was seen in Sirte, and his other son Saif al-Islam was seen in Bani Walid. Bani Walid is one of the final strongholds of Gaddafi's battalions that the revolutionaries are preparing to liberate amid sporadic shelling from inside the city.
The National Coalition for Egypt met on Wednesday to discuss the amendments to the country's electoral law proposed by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. Press TV's Karim Gamaluddin reports from Cairo.
In a meeting for the National Coalition for Egypt, political parties and activists overwhelmingly condemned the Military Council's latest parliamentary elections law and constitutional declaration.
The Military Council must set a certain date to hand over power to a civilian government to amend the constitutional declaration issued lately, or else all the political parties present today will boycott the parliamentary elections.
Potential presidential candidate Ayman Noor believes that the furtive manner in which the law and constitutional declaration were issued harks back to the days of ousted President Hosni Mubarak and the arbitrary way in which laws were passed.
We need tangible reforms, and the Military Council must abide by the revolutionary goals and objectives that have not been met. For the most part, they must leave the political arena.
Many were angered by the amendments made by the SCAF to the electoral law, asserting that it would grant ex-NDP party members a backdoor ticket into parliament.
The constitutional declaration governing elections presents an opportunity to people who are ruining the political life in Egypt. For the past 30 years, they've been reappearing in the political arena through the back door, and this is facilitated by the Military Council.
The notion that these old regime figures are gathering their forces to return once again using their money and power has enraged many political powers. The National Coalition for Egypt, which encompasses more than 45 political parties from across the political spectrum, announced a rejection to the elections law issued by SCAF, which gives the opportunity for the remnants of the dissolved National Democratic Party to participate in the political life. Karim Gamaluddin, Press TV, Cairo.
A low turnout is being reported in Saudi Arabia, where voters are casting their ballots in municipal elections, the second ever in the country's history. Like previous polls, women do not have the right to vote, but they will be able to do so in the next municipal elections in 2015. The current polling started on Thursday and will continue on Friday, with the results expected on Sunday. More than 5,300 male candidates are competing to fill half the seats in councils across the kingdom. The other half are appointed by the government. Saudi Arabia does not have a parliament. Instead, it has a Shura Council, an assembly appointed by the king, with a similar mandate to advise, but not to legislate.
tonight's top story, the United Nations Security Council has referred the Palestinian application for full UN membership to a special committee that will review it in the coming weeks. The admission committee, charged with approving new members to the world body, is comprised of all 15 Security Council members. The Palestinians claim that they have now received approval from 8 members of the council. If 9 vote in favor of the Palestinian statehood, the resolution will pass, unless one of the council's 5 permanent members uses its veto. Now, that's something that the U.S. has vowed to do. The Palestinians said that Nigeria is the 8th nation to support them, but that directly contradicts Defense Minister Ehud Barak's claim that he convinced Nigeria to vote against the Palestinian bid. The review period for a membership application to the UN is usually a maximum of 35 days, but Western diplomats are expected to prolong the process for weeks, if not months. Despite this, Palestinian envoy to the UN, Riyad Mansour, welcomed the Council's initial step.
We are grateful for the President of the Security Council for moving decisively and clearly on this, on our application, and we are grateful for the members of the Security Council for approving unanimously to send the application to the appropriate committee and to begin the process of the consideration of our application. As you see, the process is moving forward step by step, and we hope that the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility and to approve our application and to send a recommendation to the General Assembly for the admission of Palestine to the United Nations.
The Executive Committee of the PLO met today in Ramallah and rejected calls by the Middle East Quartet to restart the stalled peace talks with Israel. Ahead of the gathering, Palestinian officials condemned Israel's decision to authorize the building of 1,100 new housing units in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Gilo, which is located beyond the Green Line. The Middle East Quartet, comprised of the U.S., the European Union, Russia, and the UN, has called on both sides to refrain from taking inflammatory unilateral actions. Palestinian envoy to the UN, Riyad Mansour, slammed the Gilo project.
We gave 1,100 answers of saying no to the effort of the international community of opening doors for negotiation, and I think that this speaks clearly that Israel is not interested in negotiating with us, in spite of the fact that they say they like to do so, but their action speaks louder than what they say verbally, and they are not interested in peace and negotiation. Those who are interested in peace and negotiation would abide by their obligation under the roadmap, which calls for freeze of settlements, and they would abide by international law.
For his part, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Ron Protestor, said that the Palestinians should stop making excuses not to negotiate.
Jerusalem, and I'd like to stress that, is the capital of the Jewish people. This is our heart. Jerusalem, if I may say so, was the capital of the Jewish people when London was still a swamp. So everything is on the table, everything is negotiable, but I hear the Palestinians using every pretext in order to find a reason why not to go into negotiations. And if you zoom back for a second, all we want, and I think everything that the world will want, and both Palestinians and Israelis would want, is for both sides to sit down and negotiate everything. Nothing is off the table.
Abu Fahmi's family is one of the families suffering from the occupation measures that Israelis practice on prisoners and their families. Our camera crew visited several families of political prisoners in Gaza and brought us the following report by Wissam Abu Zaid.
The sentiments of love and yearning connect Muna with her father, Fahmi, whom she only knows from his picture. Fahmi was arrested 4 years ago along with his father, Assad, and his brother, also named Fahmi. This means 3 members of this one family are in prison, the father and his 2 sons who taste the bitterness of imprisonment. As for the rest of the family, they must shake the dust off their wounds and appeal for their release.
I don't know what to do. What did my child do to be deprived of seeing her father? Her father has been imprisoned for 48 months and she hasn't seen him since. She wishes to see him. She holds his picture and kisses it.
The issue of Palestinian political prisoners is considered to be one of the most important. Israel tries to blackmail Palestinians over these prisoners in negotiations over several years. Israel bargains over their release and ignores their suffering.
In the last period of negotiations, the Israelis sometimes brought up the issue of prisoners in response to the Palestinians' legitimate request to release them. The Israelis use extortion, meaning they exchange a prisoner's release for something else. This has stalled the issue until now, and the Palestinians' wounds are still bleeding.
This is the father of a prisoner released several months ago. When we met him, he insisted on talking about resolutions recognized by the UN that are able to set everyone free.
The prisoners are being held in captivity, and no one is looking for them. We need to summon the UN, which is all talk but no action. It has not implemented anything. What is this nonsense?
The fate of Palestinian prisoners and detainees will remain unknown until their loved ones have cried their tears dry from the sorrow of being separated for decades. The issue will remain the most important test of the occupation's intentions in the upcoming phases. Wissam Abu Zaid, Algeria TV, Gaza, Palestine.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.